We are rolling.
We are rolling.
I was just saying, I really admired the work that you're doing on the Color at Work podcast, because let me tell you a quick story. I claim that I host the longest running inclusion podcast in the world, right? And I couldn't find anyone else who has been doing it as long, like specifically around inclusion. And that statement is incorrect because I have a couple of criteria. Number one is that you've been doing it for longer than a year. Number two, it's broadly about inclusion in the workplace. And the big one is it has to be English speaking. It's not accurate to say it's the longest running inclusion podcast. It's more accurate to say the longest running English language inclusion podcast. And we don't know. Maybe there is someone else, but if there's not, I think it's just an example of bias and having limited thinking, or in my case, a self-proclaimed limitation that can often be misrepresented as a fact or the truth. So that's my way of thanking you for the work that you're doing, because not everyone will pick up on it. And these are some of the subtleties that I'm sure you've covered. I've seen some of the guests that you've had previously and addressing some of these kind of challenges, but also the challenges that I know you'll address in the future. So congratulations and well done.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the work that you do, that it's amazing. It brings a richness of research. It brings a richness also of lived experience, the leaders that you work with, and makes it so easy to understand, because you also have this thing I was telling you before we start, that this is the second time we are talking, and it seems like I've known you for a long time. Also, there is this great energy that you have and that ability to deconstruct difficult things and put it simple. But you are someone that we both know you are a man of data. And usually these people talk like in code, and you make this sound so natural and so accessible to everyone, not only through the podcast that you do, but also in the way that you translate this type of content. So thank you also, and thank you for being here. I'm very, very happy. But you know what? I'm thinking people must be thinking, who is he? What is she doing here? So let's really start.
Dedicated to the underrepresented professionals in the job market, Color at Work emerges as a safe space for sharing, empowering, and strengthening the experiences of individuals who contribute to the diversity of talents and existing potential in the workplace. My name is Sofia Medina Andrade, and I believe in the effectiveness of diversity and inclusion in achieving a more dignified and fair working world. Welcome to the space.
So, hello community. As you can see, today I have a special guest, but I think this is the first episode after the elections. After 2024 is the first episode actually of the year. So as everyone that might be listening know, in today's world, the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion is more complex than ever. Because while many organizations have made significant progress, we are also witnessing a backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also in Europe, where social political shifts and economic pressures have led to renewed skepticism. And this also makes me think about a really old problem that DUI professionals face, that is just like this feeling that despite our commitment to inclusion, the impact of our work is not really fully recognized in boardrooms, or even worse, is actively challenged. So that's why I'm very happy that we are here today, because we have a really special guest, that is Dr. Jonathanbrings. He is the host of the longest podcast running in diversity and inclusion. Yes, I will say. And for those of you that don't know it, is the element of inclusion. So please check it out, because you will find a really, really wealth of topics. You do a bit of everything, from book reviewing, from sharing the type of experience that you have with leaders on a daily basis, that it's very, very important and makes it even more up to date, because every time that you talk to them, they bring you new challenges. You help them deconstructing, and then you share that with us. And to be honest, this for me, it's amazing. I've been learning a lot, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. But then if you want to know a bit more why Dr. Jonathan is so inspiring, in my perspective, is because He has this PhD from the London School of Economics, and also he has leveraged his consulting experience to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you bring the rigor, and then you also draw that with the richness of your experiences. For those who don't know, Jonathan is born to a single mother from Ghana and raised in the UK, and he intimately understands the challenges of being an immigrant child. Throughout his career, he has also confronted the harsh realities of his background, skin color, and sexual orientation were underrepresented people in the corporate world. So, for what I've read, and you also told me in our first conversation, a pivotal moment was during the time that you spent in the US, inspired by a speech from Barack Obama. And this experience sparked your determination to dedicate your life to making workplaces more inclusive and diverse. So today, I want to take this beautiful moment here with you to just discuss one of the most pressing issues in DUI, that is basically how to sustain momentum in face of backlash and economic pushback, to explore also the reasons behind this growing skepticism and strategies to overcome resistance, and of course, your data-driven approach that might help us, especially in these difficult moments, to reinforce the business case for DUI. So once again, now officially, very, very welcome, and thank you for being here.
Sofia, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that kind introduction. And where should we start? You picked up on so many things. Where's a useful starting point for us to have this conversation? And hopefully we can leave some people with some ideas and some actions that they can take as well, so they can feel more confident about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, so that they can make a difference instead of being in fear or, you know, sometimes that insecurity that you have, whether it's about your position, that's something you want to achieve. Let's try and leave people with something that can make an impact. So where's a useful place for us to start?
Well, I will start from curiosity because, as you know, not only I'm fascinated about your work, but the more I get to know, the more I want to know. So we'll start from a place of selfishness from mine, and just to try to understand if you could, in one sentence, also this is a challenge, I know, but in one sentence, just like describe your professional journey and what actually makes, in your perspective, your approach to DUI unique.
Okay, if it's in one sentence, I'm going to fail. I can try and do it in less than 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Is that going to be acceptable?
It is. It is.
Okay. So to put this into perspective, you talked about Obama. So that might be a useful place to start. So in 2009, I was at the Obama inauguration. I came home. I was massively inspired like everybody else. And as a Black accountant, so I'm a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. I was working for a media company at that time. And every month we get Accountancy Magazine. Every month I ignore Accountancy Magazine because it's as boring as you could imagine. And it had a picture of Obama. So I think, okay, for once I'm going to open it. And inside it was talking about the lack of Black accountants in the UK accounting profession. I thought, is that true? And I thought, okay, yeah, maybe it is. So I contacted my institute. I contacted other institutes. I contacted two of the people who were mentioned in the article, someone called Dr. Anton Lewis and someone called Dr. Orthodoxia Kyriaki. This led me on a path to doing a PhD at the LSE. I'm condensing this bit, right? But these two people really inspired me. They told me some of the experiences I was having at work, which I thought I was making decisions of my own free will. And they explained to me, and in particular, Orthodoxia, Docs, we call it. She told me, oh, you had this challenge, you had this issue. I thought it was magic. I thought she was stalking. I didn't understand. How can you explain these things? And we've just met. And she told me it was the research. That's what led me to going on to do the PhD. So I wanted to start, one, I wanted this skill, but two, I wanted to understand my own experience and the experiences of others. And we can get into what accountancy and everything else looks like. So I ended up doing a PhD in what you would broadly call inclusion now, very much focused on race, discrimination. It was about professional culture, organizational culture. And that PhD combined my commercial expertise, academic rigor. And after that, I decided that I wanted to take what I had learned like the hero's journey. You go on the journey, you have all these challenges, you return back with the knowledge. And I wanted to have a new life, new purpose, new mission. And so I used what I had to serve a different community, a different audience. I know that's certainly well over a sentence, probably over 2 minutes, but that's in a nutshell how I started this. It wasn't because I was passionate about it. It wasn't because I thought there's a great career in it. None of those things. It was pure curiosity. I developed a skill, knowledge, expertise, and I wanted to share that with others so they could make a difference in their own workplaces.
And that's beautiful. I can imagine that also during your PhD and the amount of research that you could do, you could see how related those experiences are with the system and the way that the system is built and how we, as individuals coming from underrepresented groups, we actually feel. But also, I can imagine that for you, reading and really starting to realize and connecting the dots was quite overwhelming because you have experienced some of those things, or most of it. What were, in your perspective, the episodes that you could relate the most from your research linking to your personal experience?
Well, I think a large part of it was career progression. There's a concept called job hopping, okay? So what I realized was, and this is what I did, a lot of people, and don't forget, I'm an accountant as well, right? So you would stay for 1, maybe 2 cycles, accounting cycles, financial periods or whatever. So if you're working hard in a role and you want to get a promotion or you see some career progression, maybe you've been made a promise, right? And this is a question for your audience. Have you ever started a job and was made a promise about where your future was going? And so you did what was said, right? Okay, if you do these 10 things, you're going to get X. Maybe that's money, maybe that's an opportunity, whatever. And then you do those things and it doesn't happen. You say, oh, okay. And they'll say, oh, well, you should do this, this, and this. And it's interesting. So that was the kind of experience that I had. And so every time I got a promotion or every time I had a significant pay rise, it was never within the same organization, except on one occasion. I had to leave. So this is a form of job hopping, because if you look at someone's CV or resume, you're told that you want to see longevity, commitment. You should be in that role for a long period of time. And then you've got someone who maybe in 10 years has had 5 jobs or 6 jobs, even 4 jobs, depending on what your level of expertise, maybe even seniority, that can have an impact. And so this was something that I experienced. And when I did the PhD, I interviewed a lot of, I called Black professionals, specifically Black accountants and Black lawyers. And I used the term professional very specifically because I wanted to create a criteria where there was excellence involved. There were barriers to entry. You had to have a qualification. You had to have esoteric knowledge. And the thing about being an accountant and a lawyer is that society itself protects your income against the market, right? You can't just call yourself an accountant. Well, actually, you can call yourself an accountant. This is one of the challenges. But you can't just call yourself a lawyer and start practicing law. You can't just call yourself a doctor and start practicing medicine. Unfortunately, accountancy hasn't perfected that professionalization project, but they like to think that they have. And so when I interviewed these Black professionals, they were having similar, sometimes a lot worse experiences. So that's something that resonated with me. And you made a really important point, because being an accountant or just doing numbers, I always worked in organizations, except for one, that were always doing well. I used to work at a Walt Disney company. They make money. Their income, I used to work in consumer products. That was the part of the business that we used to call it free money, because they funded the movies. They funded everything. And they were selling, they weren't even creating a lot of the things. So this was incredible. And so to see people having these really challenging experiences, because when I was doing this Disney stuff, it's numbers. Yes, I'm looking at millions, but these are numbers. When you're doing a PhD and you're analyzing something, which is sometimes can be distressing, people are crying in front of you, people are breaking down. You can see the impact on someone. You've been in that business for 15 years. You haven't progressed. Like the realization, they're sharing these things with you. It can be a real challenge. And it's not something you just close the laptop, walk away from, because as you said, it resonated with me as well. So these are some of the experiences, or at least an example of an experience that resonated with me. And you have to take care of yourself while you're doing this.
Exactly. And while you were talking, I could really understand what you were saying. And it's interesting because as a recruiter, then I have to deal with managers that look at those CVs and say, well, I cannot see this person, or I cannot classify this person as stable because it's changing all the time. That's why I find this type of conversation so interesting, because they don't know actually what is the feeling that you were describing, what is actually going through this type of experiences and the frustration that you were talking, and the type of breakdown that people have, because all of a sudden they just, even when you try to push for the promotion, they say you have to work harder, you have to be better. It seems like it's your fault. So it's very interesting, but at the same time, I don't think people talk enough about it. So thank you for bringing that up, because as you said, it's an experience of many people, even though we don't talk much about it. So thank you for bringing that. And I think it helps us to understand a bit better your journey and your work and the sensitivity that you can bring to your work as well. And also what shaped you as the expert that you are today. So I think that's what also makes you so special in that sense. But also we were in the beginning of the conversation talking a bit about this context that the world is living. And for most of people, it's mainly in the US, but we know that also in Europe, we are facing a lot and seeing a lot of this increase of pushback against DUI efforts. And one thing that critics argue is that, and I want to hear from you, is that these initiatives that we fight so much to actually highlight of diversity, equity, and inclusion, instead of bringing unity, they bring division. That's what the critics actually are saying right now. So in your perspective, what are the main factors that are driving this type of resistance towards DUI? And how should these professionals, the professionals that are still remaining strong, can actually use to actually respond? How can we respond to that?
Well, I think there's a couple of interesting points. So I have several unpopular opinions as well about some of the context, because if you are working in the DEI space, let's use that term, it's a field of work. Now, in any field of work, there's going to be some ups and downs. There are going to be some boom times and there's going to be a decline. Now, you can see this is me. I studied economics at school. Funnily enough, when at the LSE, I didn't do economics, but I did it at school. I did it at university. And so this is a powerful lens for me to use in talking about this. So I think it's useful for anyone in the community here, as part of the Colour at Work community, to consider people who have been doing this for a very long time. Are they panicking? Are they terrified? I suspect not, right? Reason being is they've seen this before. And I haven't been doing it as long as some of these veterans, but let's travel back to 2020. And I would invite members of the audience to look at this, right? If you were paying attention to the media in 2019 and 2020, and I don't mean mainstream media, I mean any language around diversity, people in 2019 and early 2020 were saying there's a fatigue. We're getting bored. We're tired. It wasn't an attack. They were saying they were bored. It wasn't going anywhere. One of the things I like to point out, and I'm a critic of these mainstream diversity practices, flags, food, and fun. This isn't a term I created. I use it a lot. I picked it up from Fernando Serpa. I had him on the podcast years ago. He told me that, and I was thinking, you've just said that so perfectly. And you already know what I mean, right, Sofia? Parties,
Exactly.
Parades, panel events, entertainment as a strategy for education. So you're having photo opportunities. There's always lots of people on your website smiling. But if I asked you how many people got promoted, because you're positioning and showing all of these images of people in parties, how many images or what effort have you put to put those people in decision-making roles or to improve the skill they have? So I'm a critic of a lot of those practices, which have been celebrated for a very long time. My unpopular view is that this contributes to a correction, an issue with the way that this work has has been done. Now, in 2020, we had the pandemic. We had lockdowns. We also had the murder of George Floyd. And then initially, people were talking about race and racism. Employers started talking about race and racism. And then they quickly realized, well, it's not just race and racism. This is about whether we want to call it inequality, inequity, systematic disadvantage. All of these phrases which academics were using or very much on the fringe started to move into the mainstream. And so then you had organizations saying, well, we need a head of DEI. We're going to hire a DEI lead. If your organization wasn't big enough, you now said, well, we need to do unconscious bias training. So all of this stuff, and I described it as the DEI bubble. And for me, it's very much similar to the .com bubble. Remember so I'm a lot older than you, right? But this feeds into this story. In 1999, 2000, you and I could start a business and call it color at work /element of inclusion.com. We don't even do anything. We'd get 1,000, 1 million subscribers to this business that doesn't do anything, and we could sell it for $1 million. Anything that had .com in the name around that time was very popular. So I compare the DEI bubble to the .com bubble. Lots of media interest, low interest rates, funnily enough, lots of new entrants. So you also had lots of bad practices, lots of things that were potentially harmful. People are about to lose their money, lose their opportunities. Resources that they put into this thing are going to be wasted. Are you seeing a parallel here?
Yeah.
People put a lot of money. We're going to hire all these DEI people. How many people in the past 5 years? We're recording in 2025. And as you said, very grateful to be your first show of 2025. How many people in the past 5 years did you meet? And this is an open question, rhetorical question to the audience, who said, I'm thinking of getting into DEI. I'm thinking of getting into diversity. And can you see are you seeing the contrast with what I said in my PhD about what a professional is versus what a DEI professional is? A professional, remember what I said, you've got this knowledge, training, expertise. DEI professional, the perception, and ask everyone to think about, is it true, is that anyone can do it. And in fact, many people would argue that the only qualification for doing it is your lived experience. You've got a lived experience of a particular issue, inequity, challenge. Your social identity is what validates you to do this work. And I say this as well, because now just to reach back to my PhD, because some people think I take shots at the lived experience. The title of my thesis was Crafting an Identity. It's about the lived experience of what I called minority, racial, and ethnic individuals. I took a very different perspective to the way people talk about lived experience now. And so all of this is to say, one, the DEI bubble has burst, but it was inflated. Two, this is a cycle of change. People who have been doing this for a long time are not as panicky as some of the people who haven't, or some of the tourists who have just come in and are leaving. That's the thing. Yeah, Sofia's laughing at this point, right?
I like the term tourist.
And three, there's a lot of bad actors that have contributed to this. What we call 3-book experts. Someone who's read 3 books on this topic and is now on stage, is now head of chief diversity officer, who, they've got this lived experience. They've read 3 books. Maybe they were the head of an ERG or a BRG or a network, whatever language you use. And now they're one of these people who was hired. And then guess what they're doing? They're using entertainment as a strategy, flags, food, and fun. So I say all this to say is that lays the groundwork for wasting resources, not actually creating any change, and in some cases creating harm. I'm not saying it's only that, but for me, there was enough of that which made it easy for critics to point out some of the harm and the damage and the inadequacy and sometimes incompetence of some of the people in the space. And I say that not to characterize everyone like that, because there are people who know what they're doing, who actually create value, create an impact, and they're able to demonstrate that and articulate it. There's also plenty of people who can't. And I think that contributes to some of the challenges here. So you can see I've got quite a different view in terms of, there's a new election. Trump is here. Elon Musk is saying these things. Whereas I'm saying, look, there are people, and the people we work with, we encourage them to take a particular perspective which would mitigate this.
And that's what I think that it's the beauty of your work, because you are able to deconstruct it and to make it easily to understand, because that's the thing. You mentioned here that there was this boom that most of companies wanted to make part of it. It was like, basically it was cool to say that we are an inclusive company. But then the thing is, and this is also what I hear the most in terms of criticism from critics or skeptics, but also from professionals, from DEI, is that basically they say, but how to put those or how to measure these initiatives? Because they say that this is what lacks the most, that they don't know how to translate those results in numbers. And my question to you is, because you are someone that actually, that's the thing, you have this compassion. I think you talk about data with compassion. That's the way I see it. And how can these professionals, or you, even when you are talking with new leaders that are very skeptical about this type of work and the reason of having these initiatives, how you present data, how you actually tell them or make them see data in a different way?
I would go a little bit before that, because it implies that there's a problem and that problem is well understood. And that might not be the case. So let's pretend, and this is me with my accounting background, this is me with my audit background, but also with my research background. I don't assume that you agree with me. I don't assume that you even know what I'm talking about. So we're in an organization and we're saying we need more diversity. Like, what's that? What does that mean? Just as a person, explain that to me in simple terms. And most people can't do that. So one of the things I say is it's useful. So we say organizations experience three big problems on their inclusion journey. Number one, we call them the three biggest problems. One, they have difficulty engaging the people they want to include. We'll park that for the moment. Two, they have challenges creating a culture of inclusion where everyone can reach their potential. And number three is they struggle to articulate a business case for diversity, equity, whatever words you want to use in their specific organization. They can tell you a story. They can tell you about, the research says, but I said, okay, what does it mean for you in your organization today? Why? And so, number one, I would encourage everybody to think about what does diversity mean? What does it mean in your organization? What does inclusion mean? Me personally, we tend to talk about two things. So we talk about diversity is a management approach that recognizes that as individuals, we have differences and there is value in those differences. So there's a bit of a value judgment in there, right? The other thing what I talk about all the time, and this is why it's called the element of inclusion, not the element of diversity, is we think of inclusion and we think of that as a systematic business strategy to ensure that everyone can share the same advantages and benefits. So everyone can perform, everyone can belong, everyone can reach their potential. That's where we spend the most time. And because we think of that, that's what inclusion means. So now, we don't have an inclusive workplace. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means everyone can perform, everyone can belong, everyone can reach their potential. Well, those people aren't performing very well. Those people aren't able to reach their potential. Those people aren't able to belong. They're being excluded. Oh, okay. Now we can start getting somewhere, right? So we need a shared language, not academic language, shared language that the people in your organization already use, preferably, because you and I know, Sofia, in an organization, there's always secret language. You know that. And everyone here knows that. There's these words, there's the XYZ report or the W53 report. No, your friends don't know what that means. Your family don't know what that means. Only the people in your team knows what that means. So maybe when we're talking about inclusion, what we find useful is if you use that, this is what it means here. Oh, okay, we get it. That's one thing. Okay. The other thing is, there's three things that we use. We call it high impact inclusion work because I've already told you we're talking about inclusion. We want to make a high impact and it is work. And you'll notice that even when I defined inclusion, we describe it as a business strategy. So we're placing it inside the business context. That's our approach right now. So this isn't a conversation about society. We're talking about the workplace. So in the workplace, we want to do high impact inclusion work. Over 10, 15 years of doing this stuff, combining the research with my day-to-day work, I found three things work really well. Number one, you need to get buy-in from your colleagues. You need people to know that you are able to lead. You don't need to be an expert, but you do need to be a credible advisor. Let me say that again. You don't need to be an expert. There's people who you say, oh, well, you don't know about this. You don't know about that. You don't need to know. You do need to be a credible advisor. That does mean competence. It does mean a critical mass of knowledge. You have that. If other people can see that, and if you can solve, at least remember the three biggest problems, at least that third one, this becomes really useful. Okay, we know you don't know everything. We're on this inclusion journey, as we say. We're going to follow you because you're the best person to lead and you've got a better plan than everyone else. Great. The second thing is we're talking about making an impact. And once again, notice my bias here. I am an accountant, right? I've come from the private sector. I was talking about Disney. They make money. How do I know? Because I was the one counting. Yeah. So we're going to report. We're going to provide results on something that we want to do. What are we going to do? And this is where I can borrow from accounting and finance, because when we do reports, it all sounds boring, but really, what are we really doing? Another three things. We're trying to control. You're given resources. We're kind of control what the resources are used for. We need to communicate what we're doing. And then we need to challenge to make sure that we are getting results. So, we thought that was going to happen. It didn't happen. What can we do next time? Right? And so we're now building this thing. So just to pause and bring everyone up to speed. Number one, we're getting buy-in from people. Number two, we're going to focus on measurable results, something that you can demonstrate a transformation of. And as you said, people will talk about data and numbers. You may be forgiven for thinking that this is just about data and numbers. It's actually about the explanation of what happened. Because the numbers are either going to go up, go down, or stay the same. That's not the issue. The issue is what's the explanation for that? And that's what you need to understand. So let's give an example. We talked about this on our podcast recently, which is we're going to do some training. We're going to do some training on hiring because we believe that our hiring team are overlooking candidates. I'm not going to say bias, but they need to reconsider the recruitment process in order to make sure that we are giving everyone the opportunities they deserve. This is me just throwing this out there. And so we're going to reconsider the process itself, and we can measure how we reconsider that process. Okay, we went through some training to do this, and we thought that was going to take 3 months. And when I say the training wasn't going to take 3 months, but the change in the hiring, which we are measuring, we thought that was going to take 3 months.
Did it?
No, it took 6 months in this hypothetical example, okay? It took 6 months. Okay, now in this hypothetical example, we got the result that we wanted, which is maybe we increased, in this case, I don't want to say we increased, we changed the hiring process in the way that we said we were going to. We know that because the number of people who followed our new process changed. We said it was going to take 3 months. It took 6 months. Fine. Suppose you accept everything I just said. The next question is, one, what's the reason? Why did it take 6 months instead of 3 months? And also, why did it work? Because a lot of these things don't work in the way you expect. So well done, it worked. Why did it take 6 months? Why didn't we know it was going to take 6 months? Now, the next thing, Sofia, is there's going to be an explanation. Now, or also known as an excuse, right? Because that reason could be an excuse. This is why I ask, what's the explanation? So whatever, you're going to tell me a story, but I want to say, how did that impact on our process? So now it's an explanation instead of, oh, well, it's them. The training was bad. Oh, there's all sorts of things. Then I want to know, what are we going to do different?
That's also the thing.
So now can you see we're drawing all of these things together? This is a more robust process. Can you see how this is a little bit different from saying it's Black History Month, it's International Women's Day. We're going to celebrate this group. I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate groups, but can you see how the conversation we were having, albeit it was a bit ambiguous, because this is an example as for the purposes of our conversation, but there's a rigorous process behind it, which you can measure. You can communicate, you can share, and people, even if they didn't know the details, if you had that kind of rigor which is what we encourage in our clients, can you see how they would look to you as being a credible advisor?
Yeah, because also while you were talking, I was just thinking, this is a type of exercise that can be applied in all spectrums of life. You could put it as a solving problem strategy and apply it to a situation in every department of your company, for instance. I was just thinking this actually it's a strategy, actually. It's kind of a method that you apply to solve problems.
Absolutely.
Hello, community. How are you finding this episode? Did you know that Color at Work is available on all podcast platforms? We are also on Instagram and most recently on TikTok. So you can find us by searching Color at Work Podcast. I can't wait to hear your comments, engage with you, and in this way create a space for us. I will see you there.
And you engage people because those that are being asked those questions, they will think about it. They will actually, it's not the yes or no question. It makes you think about it. It makes you actually reflect. And this then makes you also, I think it brings you to a space of humbleness that you just say, well, actually, I never thought about it. I never stopped to think about it in this way. And then kind of softens up your resistance and makes you say, I'm on board. Let's work on this. So it's quite beautiful.
And you're unlikely to resist if it's been explained to you in a way that makes sense in your organization.
Yes, because the way that you approach is like not in organizations in general, in your specific case, in your reality. How does this work? So it's quite beautiful because you remember what I said, that you have this ability of deconstruct complex situations or cases or data in a simple way. This is what you did and made me think, wow.
No, thank you, Sofia.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing because it's quite beautiful in a way. I had more questions, but now I'm thinking, I think he answered to all of those.
But I want to add something else because that's not the end. The high impact inclusion work is three things. It's one, we get the buy-in. Two, we've already said we're looking for measurable results, and we went into a little bit of detail about what that looks like. The third thing is we need this to be systematic. It's one thing if you do it once. How can you make sure you can do this again and again and again? And as you said, not just for this issue, but other pressing issues in our organization. And that's where we talk about evidence-based inclusion. And specifically, this helps you to make better decisions. So we think of this as a decision process, but as you said, it's a strategy for improving the way that we work. And a large part of that, you've talked about data a lot. Well, we like to think about evidence because evidence, let's look at this, data and evidence, right? Data is my height. So I'm 6'3". That's data. It's a number, isn't it? Evidence is am I tall or am I short?
But we can say that, well, it depends.
You need more information, right?
Exactly.
We where am I? In the Netherlands, which is my understanding is the tallest, I think the average height in the Netherlands is taller than everyone else. So maybe I'm not tall there. Or am I standing in a room full of NBA players? Am I tall now? So this is the thing. The data itself is only useful if it helps us to tell a story. So the evidence helps us to tell a story. And specifically, what do we mean by a story? It has to solve a problem, like you said, right? So whenever anyone's talking about diversity, inclusion, any of these things, they're typically talking about, they're making a claim. We don't have enough diversity. That's a claim, yeah? Or maybe that's an assumption.
Yes.
It's an assumption. I'm assuming we don't have enough diversity in this department, right? Okay. Or it's a hypothesis. It's something that they think. They believe that.
Or the opposite, when they say, we do have a lot of diversity. Because
so that's a claim.
Mm-hmm.
That's a claim. Or the hypothesis is, oh, we have more diversity than they do, right?
Yeah.
Or it's an assumption. Well, I see lots of diversity every day. I assume that reflects the business. So the evidence helps us to support or undermine the claim, the hypothesis, or the assumption.
I can see you
can see the method, right? You can see it.
Yeah.
You see how this isn't random, Sofia. You can see that there's a process here. There's a system here. This is something you could repeat by yourself. And so where do you get this evidence? We always look to 4 key areas. One is what the research says. You shouldn't be surprised that I would say that. We started this conversation with me talking about the PhD, how there's so much information out there. There's so much evidence to help you with your claims, hypotheses, and assumptions, right? Second is the organization itself. I won't go into too much detail because that's probably where most of your colleagues, your community, they spend their time collecting data. But I would encourage them to turn that data into evidence instead of just pointing at numbers. And we've talked in several ways about what that looks like.
Exactly.
Next, stakeholders. These are the people who are affected by the decisions that you're making. So if you wanted more Black women in a particular role, in a particular department, it might be useful to speak to Black women, or it might be useful to speak to people in that department. It might be useful to speak to people in that team because they're going to be affected by the decisions that you're making. So it's very useful. And that also ties into equity because it's not equitable unless the people directly affected have an input. And I think that's one of Leventhal's 6 rules for equity. And then the last thing is your expertise, yours and other people's. This is why this podcast is so useful because people are able to draw on your expertise and mine. You don't just have to rely on your own. And this is what is really useful. I typically look for people who demonstrate their expertise, not just having strong opinions. So going back to an earlier point that you were saying earlier, Sofia, there are people who are pointing at President Trump or Elon Musk or whatever. They're saying, oh, we don't like what you're saying. We disagree. It's wrong. Okay. But they're not telling you what do I do now? Suppose I agree. Suppose I like that on social media. Suppose you do all the things that you've probably seen in the past month or two. Here's a list of companies that are doing this. Here's a list who aren't. Or I really don't like this. Okay. Suppose you accept that and buy into that. Now, what are you doing? What's happening for you at work? Is that the expertise that you are drawing on? Or check out a podcast if it's useful and helps you, or read a book, or do a course if the course is going to help you to solve a problem. If it's more raising awareness and, oh, that was really useful, I would discourage you from doing it. Read books, check out podcasts, check out research, do things that can actually help you.
Definitely. That's the thing I was actually thinking about, not only about leaders, but actually peers, like this type of stakeholders that deal with you from day to day. Because as you said, and what I understood for what you said is also having them backing you up, having them validating you as someone that is actually essential for the team, and understanding how diversity is actually a tool that can help the team and the company to achieve their goals. But then for me, it's just like everyone has now, especially nowadays, the responsibility and the capability to be an advocate for DEI. I always say diversity, equity, inclusion because of my accent. But then that's the thing. Reading the books, it's not enough if they don't know how to translate this data. That's why the way that you deconstructed it, it's very beautiful. But I'm also thinking about those, especially those professionals that are seeing that their jobs are in the line. And I think that this can be very discouraging, but at the same time lead to some breakdowns, burnout as well. And thinking of them, what is actually the advice that you give them? Because I think that a lot of people are feeling discouraged. They don't have support in their companies because, as we know, this type of roles is basically for one person. They work alone. Even though they work with a lot of people, they don't have a big team. So they don't have people to rely on. And it seems like these type of things are making their it can affect their initiatives. Because if you are not doing well, you are not being able to perform at your best. So I think a lot about them, to be honest.
I do as well. And in fact, most of the people who we work with don't have big teams. They have small teams. And you made a great point as well. It has an impact on their initiatives. So I would ask, what kind of initiatives are you doing? There's 2 things, because now we're getting back into the tactical work. And then there's the bit about how do we encourage them and support them? My view is always to encourage people. And you'll notice this. My approach is always around agency. what can you do as an individual? Because there are some narratives which say things like, well, the government should change, the president should change, the policy should change. And maybe they're right. But what that doesn't do is solve your question, which is, what do I do as an individual while we're waiting, even campaigning, whatever it is? And so my view is always to do the high impact inclusion work, to deliver on those things. I think as individuals, you should always pay. Actually, this is a cheeky tactic that I always do whenever I was working in an organization. And this is why I think so many DEI professionals are vulnerable is, and once again, spot the bias from my finance accounting background, okay? Anyone in your organization who is considered to be important does something that impacts on a report that senior leaders look at, or more importantly, make decisions about. Let me say that again.
Yes, please.
Anyone who is considered to be important has an impact on a report that senior leaders look at and then make decisions upon.
So are those people our sources?
To put it a different way, what work do you do that impacts a report that senior leaders care about?
Okay.
So my tactic that I always did, and I helped people to do this, if you want to make an impact, you need to be doing something that you can demonstrate has an impact on the goals of the business already, or in the future, or is happening. And if it appears on one of these reports, it means it's so important that the people at the top of the organization have to pay attention to it. It affects their decisions. So I always encourage you to do something that demonstrates value to the business. So it goes back to earlier saying with their initiatives, what are your initiatives doing? Yeah. So even if now you previously weren't doing anything, what can you do right now that will impact? And it will be a pressing problem. Or maybe it's a problem that isn't going to manifest for another 2 to 3 years. You need to now, you can already guess what I'm going to say. You need to provide evidence to show that it's a pressing issue. And where are we going to get this evidence from? 4 key sources. We're going to look at the research. We're going to look at in the organization itself. We're going to look at the stakeholders, and you're going to explore your own professional experience and expertise. We're going to use that evidence to build a case for why this thing that we are proposing is so important that senior leaders need to take care of it, need to pay attention to it. I think that's a compelling, high impact way of doing inclusion work.
And it's a way of working, because while you were talking, I was thinking, and I think this is the first episode that I'm recording in which the outcome is being completely different from what I was thinking in the beginning. Because you are giving us training on how to actually work, because this is valid for everything, not only for applying this case on how to advocate for the diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but for anything that we want to do. I'm thinking about a professional that wants to present something to the board, for instance, and it's a bold idea. This is a great strategy on how to build the case and how to present it, and even how to defend that. It's brilliant. It's beautiful.
Thank you. And you anticipate the problems as well.
Exactly.
Because if you're really smart, all the people who disagree with you, you would have engaged them before.
And you would actually make them, in a way, to think out loud of those problems and maybe bring some solutions.
No, you'd solve it. So you even say, hey, I spoke to Sofia earlier. I told Sofia my plan. She's got 5 problems with it. We've already addressed them, except one. And this is why we think. And, Sofia and I are going to talk about this, but this is how you do it. Do you know what most DEI leads do? 1, they make a strategy that they can't justify. So they'll just say, we're going to increase representation of X in 3 years by this number. They can't justify why that number, why this people, why. It sounds cool. The other thing is, do you know what they spend the first 3 months of their time doing when they start these jobs? They just have meetings with people. They go and have meetings, and in all of these meetings, everyone says, yeah, we'll support you. This is great. We're looking forward to working with you. Yeah. But 3 months later, 6 months later, they realize you haven't done anything. You've done a lot of talking, but you haven't delivered anything. At most, you've promised a strategy, but we don't know that you can do it. Remember what I said about getting buy-in? Why are you a credible advisor? Because maybe you're going to talk about what you used to do in that company. Great. What are you going to do here? Or what are you doing? A lot of people don't do that. So they find themselves vulnerable. And so the goal, this is what we encourage people to do, is to have that rigor. You've got that commercial expertise. Well, we use like academic rigor, commercial expertise, but you're trying to solve problems in the business, but you still need that critical mass of knowledge. Now, one obvious question that maybe members of your community could raise is, okay, Dr. Jonathan, that sounds great. I'm listening to everything you said. That sounds great, but I don't have a budget. I don't have anyone who can help me. This all sounds wonderful, but I don't have $1 million budget. I don't have $100,000 budget. I don't have a 50,000 euro budget.
Or budget is being cut.
Or the budget's being cut. I always ask people, what did you spend your budget on? There's an episode of our podcast, and it's called something like Why You Deserve a Budget Cut.
Why you deserve?
Yeah. Why you deserve a budget cut? Because let's play a hypothetical game. Who gets their budget cut in a business or in an organization?
Those that are not actually presenting results.
Tends to be the people who are not deemed essential, or those who aren't, in the eyes of the organization, making the best use of the resources. So this is the harsh bit, right? And this is why I don't get invited to panel events on this topic. And so maybe trigger warning. If you're a person who the thing that you're reporting on is engagement scores, or we've increased their net promoter score, and that's it. Or there's the people who come to our events would recommend them to other people. If these are the measures for the budget that you have, then you are probably vulnerable, because it's difficult to tie those things to things that people think are urgent or important. And if you can, then you should. If you can tie those things to urgent issues in your organization, then you should. I find whenever I speak to people who have had their budget cut, they typically were spending the money on events, or they were spending the money on sponsorships or trying to get awards, or they were spending the money on things like unconscious bias training.
I was thinking of training.
Yeah. And they weren't able to demonstrate the value of that. I like to pick on unconscious bias training because the evidence to show it works isn't there, right? The body of research shows that it's not effective in the way that people will have you think. Whenever I speak to and ask, I don't know if you've ever had anyone on here who says, yes, we did unconscious bias training, and now these 5 things are better. I've never encountered it, right? But once again, I could be biased. This is why I always go to the research as well. And I meet people and I ask them, hey, you did unconscious bias training. Did it work? What was the thing that changed? No one's ever offered me anything. People in your business also recognize that, Sofia.
Yeah. It's important to have these trainings, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, I would say it's only important if it delivers results. And the results for me would be changed behavior.
And that's the thing that it's more difficult to actually effectively see and measure, I would say.
Then it's not effective training. Example, Sofia, do you know how to use Excel?
Yeah.
Okay, but I can use Excel. You can use Excel. Let's pretend we could not use Excel. If we did training on how to use Excel, how would we know the training was effective?
By starting to use Excel without difficulty and becoming actually good at it, I would say. It would change our way.
Yeah, well, even just using it, right? It would be like, oh, Sofia couldn't use Excel. Dr. Jonathan couldn't use Excel. Now they can. How do you know? Because they produced this spreadsheet. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now that thing that used to take them 3 hours takes them 20 minutes.
Or they're not asking help to their colleagues for everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's knock-on benefits, but the training, we know it worked because they can use it. Now, if we went on training and we couldn't use Excel.
Yeah, it's not effective.
Some people say, yeah, okay, Dr. Jonathan, but that's for a tangible skill or asset or a behavior. I would say, okay, so suppose you did unconscious bias training.
It's mindset change. That's more difficult.
For what though? For what? What's the outcome? You do unconscious bias training. What do we expect to change? We expect to change your behavior in some way, shape, or form. Or you said the mindset, but how does that manifest in the organization?
Into the environment.
But let's go a bit further. Suppose that's true. How would we know it's happened?
By how people would feel, by the satisfaction, the level of inclusion, of belonging.
And how would we track that?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, their productivity also, and in the way that their motivation as well, their motivation and the retention of the company itself into their employees.
Yeah. Now, the retention is a tough one because that would take a long time to know if that worked, right?
Yeah.
You jump to something like productivity. A lot of people, as you say, stuff like motivation, satisfaction, these things, and you actually said inclusion and belonging as well.
Yeah.
Motivation and satisfaction, there are measures to track them that are quite useful. Even same with inclusion. A lot of the time, when organizations track inclusion itself, they're not very careful about it. They may just ask, hey, do you think this is inclusive? Going back to what I said earlier, does that sound like a compelling result in our hypothetical organization? You're the CEO, Sofia.
I understand. Comparing to other type of reports, right? It wouldn't show up in the same way or in the same type of level, I would say. Yeah, makes sense.
And that's what people are competing with as well. And so I encourage people, as I say, to do the high impact inclusion work where you can show the results of what you are doing. People may argue with it, but a useful question would be, can I present this to someone in our business, in our organization, and can I explain what we did and what happened to someone who doesn't care and for them to get it? Because if I have to be emotionally invested, then typically it means that you haven't made the argument properly.
It's kind of like a bias. It's like asking someone that has already a positive bias into that, right?
Yeah, or it's a positive prejudice, isn't it? You're prejudging that the work of the DEI team or the DEI project or initiatives are good. I think it's good, but if you can't show it, it doesn't meet the standards of the organization. Now, I am coming from a very particular view because there are those who would argue that some of the standards of the organization need to change. And I agree, but you still need to show the benefit because we live in a world where organizations this is what they said from when I was a kid in economics, like first day, the teacher said, economics is the allocation of finite resources to infinite wants. And I've always found that to be very useful. Should I say that again? You like that one?
I do. You're seeing my face, right?
Yeah. So my economics teacher, first day of school, he said that economics is the science, and people don't even believe, they call it the dismal science. People don't like it. They said it's the allocation of finite resources. There's only so much gold, wood, money, time, attention to infinite wants. As human beings, we want everything. We want everybody to have a house. We want everybody to have food. We want everybody to have shelter. How do we allocate the finite resources we have to these infinite wants? And that perspective has helped me in a useful way to think about how we allocate resources to building inclusive workplaces. Because you need to demonstrate, we know that we can't fix everything immediately. So with the finite resources we have, how can we demonstrate that we are allocating them in a responsible way, given our infinite wants?
And I think that's a great way to make people in general, not only the professionals in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also the advocates of it, to think how they can restructure their strategies, how they can actually rebuild. Because that's the thing. I like the fact that you used a lot this term that we, diversity and inclusion, are, or equity and inclusion advocates and professionals, we are vulnerable. And it's true. So how can we turn this vulnerability into a strength by redefining our strategy? So this is something that for me, it's very interesting. I'm thinking while you're talking, I'm really reflecting, and I know myself, I will spend maybe the next month thinking about it. And I'm really happy to have this beautiful conversation that is already having an effect on me. And I can imagine that for those that are listening as well. Also, another question that I have that it's basically, you like to challenge things. And even your line of thought is into that, you challenge things. So what do you think that are the biggest challenges that European companies are facing and how they can navigate these waves of division? Because that's the thing. Some people say, okay, what is happening in the US, it's very particular. It's not really happening here. We have some of the consequences, but still it's not as harsh as it is there. But we know that also in here we are feeling the impact. So in your perspective, what are the main challenges and strategies? I think you gave us lots of material to build strategies, but what are the main challenges that European companies are facing when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and efforts?
That's a great question, and I genuinely don't have a clear answer, if I'm being honest. I think anything I say would be massively speculative. When I speak to organizations, European companies, so I'm thinking of two organizations that I've spoken to. One's a client who have a French headquarters. One's actually, they're on the verge of being a client, kind of a client, let's say.
Hopefully a client.
Yes. And they're francophones. So they're not French, but I think there's an organization I'm speaking with who's in Spain as well. Speaking to them directly, the biggest issues they're having are around distributed work. But I don't think of that as a European problem.
No?
No, I think that's a global problem. And when I say distributed work, and it's funny, a good friend, Kay Fabella, talks a lot about this, distributed work methods. I think that's a 21st century challenge. It could be argued that that's an inclusion challenge. That's what they talk about, but they're also talking about all these other things as well. So I don't have a clear, insightful answer to that question. I suspect many of your guests do.
I think, honestly, no one has, to be quite honest, because that's the thing. Those are challenging times and unpredictable times as well. So this combination, it's not good. But at the same time, I think you gave us tools that can help us reframe our mindset and our approach. And this can help us to fight the backlash and, in a way, find creative ways of standing our ground, I believe.
I agree. But I would also say, Sofia, because if you ask someone, do you know what someone's going to tell you? They're going to tell you AI. Someone would say AI. Someone would say DEI backlash and, because the US did it, Europe will follow. Certainly people will say the UK will follow as well, just as almost like a case of policy. What the US does, the UK follows, and Europe pays close attention to. There are different contexts there. So this is what people would say. I personally, now this is a claim, right? So my view, I remember entering 2020, and funnily enough, I was in Brazil, right?
So it's quite interesting, actually.
I love Brazil. Yeah, I love Brazil. And I'm hopeful anyway. So I've been to Brazil so many times. One of the things I love about Brazilians, I love Salvador, right? I love Bahia.
That makes the two of us.
Yeah, I love it. My friends in Salvador, there's this thing they always said to me. They said to me, John, aqui no Brasil, pode tudo. They always say that to me, which for those who don't know, here in Brazil, you can do it. That's how I interpreted it. You can do it. It can be done. You can make it happen. They were always very positive, like regardless of their background as well. And some of them are not from wealthy backgrounds in the same way I was. But here's what's interesting. New Year's Eve in Brazil, this is a claim. I felt that the new 20s, this decade, was going to be massively transformative. I felt it was going to be disruptive. I felt it was going to be challenging. I felt there's going to be some massive winners and some massive losers. This was I don't know why, this was my view.
You weren't wrong.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden we had COVID and everything else. I was like, wow, we're halfway through. As you reminded, this is the first show. Thank you again. 2025.
Thank you.
Right? I don't expect the next 5 years to be a nice, clear, easy sail. I think, but going back to what I said, pode tudo, I think there's going to be some massive opportunities. Once again, these are claims, right? So we've talked about all this. Oh, Dr. Jonathan's talking about evidence and everything. Everything I'm saying now, there is no evidence. I want to be very clear. This is my personal view, which you should disregard if it doesn't match yours. But
it's great to hear.
Yeah, but I'm sharing and it's a positive one. And it's also a naive one because in this work, I'm motivated by a vision of Star Trek, which is in the future. Remember I talked about earlier, everyone has food, everyone has shelter. We want everyone to have medical attention or access to healthcare. Like in my vision of the future, all of those things are done. Those are sorted, which bringing it back to the economics thing, we found a way to make our finite resources match or better match our infinite wants, or at least our needs, because our needs are finite, at least. If our wants may not be, but our needs are finite. And so my dream, or my I don't know why, my view is that we're going to get closer to having that potential, at least, of addressing that. And I see a lot of this disruption now as part of that. This is my view. It's a claim, but this is what I see. And so I want to encourage everybody to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. They're not going to always feel comfortable. Sometimes it may be quite startling, disruptive, and that's not going to feel nice all the time. But I have this naive belief that there are opportunities out there for many of us if we're willing to take a different perspective. I don't mean that as a platitude. What I hope we've covered today is some examples of how you can change your attitude, change your approach, use different resources in order to get better outcomes, as opposed to just wishing for it or wishing someone else would do it for you.
And that's why I'm so happy for this conversation, honestly. That's the thing. I like this positive approach because, again, you gave us the tools for it to put that in practice. So thank you so much. And before letting you go, I don't want to, but I have to. There are 2 questions that I always ask guests out of curiosity, but also because I believe it, in a way, it speaks to the listeners. And one of them is, with the broad experience that you have nowadays in terms of work, but also personally speaking, what are the truths that you believe that weren't told to you about the workplace when you were starting?
I now believe, okay, there's 2 things, right? Did you want to?
The more, the merrier.
Okay, there's 2 things. And I actually learned this in my PhD, and I took a course on social networking, and I wish I knew this. I was like, oh my, it's so obvious, right? When you join an organization, there's an organizational chart, right? In reality, there's a shadow chart or an informal chart. So you've got the diagram with who reports into who. There's also a secondary diagram that you should try to create that will actually tell you how to get things done in the organization. And the way you do that is ask yourself the question in your team, who does everybody defer to? Yeah. And when I say defer, who does everybody ask for advice? That person isn't always the person who's the top of the chart.
Yeah.
If you understand that, who everybody asks for advice when you start a new role or in an organization, whose opinion matters in a way that you shouldn't really, but everyone seems to pay attention. These are clues. This is a very strong clue about the actual hierarchy of decision making and who has influence in an organization. I wish I knew that.
And thank you for sharing, because I didn't think about it in this way.
Yeah, I didn't. And I had to do a course. I was on a course, and it's about social networks and how there are people who have very tight networks, i.e. lots of connections, and there are people who are quite remote. And there's all sorts of stuff. But this was one of the things. The person you're looking for is someone who's towards the center of this network, has loads of connections to them, and often they're willing to talk to you and engage with you. But you would be surprised. So that's one thing. The other thing I've learned is that this is probably in the workplace, but in life, there are things offered to you. You're offered a menu, of options. I've now learned that it's possible to order off the menu.
What do you mean? Deconstruct that, please.
Let's go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to use you as an example, Sofia. So did anyone ask you to start this podcast?
No.
Do you get paid to do this podcast?
No.
If you stop doing this podcast, is there anyone who would say, outside of your community, who really love this, but in your day-to-day life, would there be any consequences for not doing it?
No.
However, you doing this podcast has created opportunities, value. It's brought useful things into the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, or maybe even tens of thousands of people, some of who you're never, ever going to meet. It's also, I suspect, because this is me reflecting my own experience, it's created opportunities that you wouldn't have. Even us having this conversation, which is a lovely experience, if you didn't have a podcast, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
That's true. That's true.
You starting a podcast was not on the menu of options in your life that was presented to you.
Exactly. But then the consequence.
So you chose something that was off the menu. You were proactive, whether you ask. Sometimes this is asking. Sometimes this is starting. Sometimes this is, making a request that maybe everyone says has been denied, right?
Yeah.
I found that looking for things off the menu, sometimes they're available. It's not just what's being presented to you. There are things out there that you can have, that you can do, that you can achieve. No one taught me that. And I wish I knew that before I started work.
I agree with you. And again, you just put it in such a nice way and inspired me. You gave my example, but you inspired me.
It's my pleasure, Sofia. And once again, thank you for even doing this.
No, thank you. Thank you for also inspiring all of us to do this and for keep sharing so much knowledge with us and valuable inputs and inspiring us.
It's my pleasure, Sofia. It's my pleasure. Wishing you all the best, and definitely wishing everyone who's part of the Colour at Work community, wishing you all the best. And if you need anything, reach out to me. You can find me on social media and all the rest of that good stuff. Thank you so much, Sofia, for making this a great experience. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Colour at Work, edited by Augusto Piccinini. We will be back next month with more great conversations. If you enjoyed this show, please rate, share, and leave a comment. Until next time.